Welcome to VidZet, your home for careful consideration of our common concerns. With the March for Our Lives, we saw a host of people screaming that we had to get rid of assault weapons. It can be entertaining to watch them try to define the term. After a while, they stumble around for a while, and you end up with a list of things that have nothing to do with assault rifles. For example, a pistol grip is high on the list. While the original assault rifle, the German World War II Sturmgewehr 44, has a pistol grip, so does the Wild West lever-action rifle, this hunting rifle, and this bench rest target rifle. Not one of them is an assault rifle. You see, there is a definition of an assault rifle, which we will get to. And before you go nuts, the law did carve out an exception for bolt and lever-action guns. That's not the point. Each of these rifles has a visual feature that was banned in the Federal Assault Weapons Ban of '94. But that feature had nothing to do with how the gun functioned. And it has nothing to do with how deadly the gun is in the right hands. It simply happens to look scary on most guns, particularly if they're black. And by the way, don't confuse your lefty friend with the fact that the assault weapons ban had zero, repeat, zero effect on crime. Next we get to folding stocks. This M1 carbine of World War II vintage has a folding stock. Just like AR-15s with folding stocks, it makes it easier to carry, particularly when you sling it over your shoulder. What it does not do is make the gun easier to conceal because it's still a long gun. And it does not make the gun into a spray and pray machine gun. Even the M4, the military version of the AR-15, isn't fired from the hip. All soldiers are trained to bring it up to the eye and use the sights. So a folding stock doesn't make the gun function any differently. Another item is a flash hider. This sounds scary because now no one can see the muzzle flash. Newsflash! That's not what it does. A flash hider is actually a muzzle brake that deflects some of the expanding gases in a direction that reduces recoil, making the rifle hit your shoulder less hard. It doesn't change how the gun works, and it doesn't hide the flash. But don't tell that to the people who marched. You might disturb one of their preconceived notions. So what is an assault rifle? It's an invention of the German Wehrmacht in 1944. Existing battle rifles were too heavy and too slow to operate, so they came up with a lighter rifle that used a lower power cartridge. That let the soldier carry more ammo. Selective fire allowed it to be used as a battle rifle in a semi-automatic mode, or be switched to full auto when a machine gun was needed. In short, it was a completely new type of weapon. The U.S. didn't have an assault rifle until the M16 was put in service in Vietnam. It was a version of the AR-15 that had been sold to civilians for 10 years. The primary difference is that the M16 assault rifle can be selected to fire more than one shot with a single trigger pull. That's also the definition of a machine gun in federal law. And since the National Firearms Act of 1934, no one can buy a machine gun without a special license. And since the passage of the Firearms Owners Protection Act, no machine gun manufactured since 1986 can pass into private ownership. But don't let that disturb the loud marchers. The fact that assault rifles aren't used in crime is irrelevant. The fact that the Parkland shooting did not involve an assault rifle is irrelevant. They want a scary sounding term to make us ban scary looking rifles. Oh, did I mention that rifles are used in less than 400 murders a year? Don't disturb them with that either. Actually, we need to disturb them. Every time they make a false assertion, Be like Kyle Kashuv, the Parkland student who won't let the gun banners go unchallenged. Onlookers may discover that the left has nothing more than blind rage. None of their solutions will solve anything. Most of them will make things worse, and they're afraid to debate on issues. The lies continue. Supposedly, the Constitution only protects muskets since those were the only weapons that existed when the Constitution was written. Guess what? Around 1500, almost 3 centuries before the Constitution, a German gunmaker sold a 10-shot matchlock rifle. A 16-round version exists from about 1580. The first repeaters in large quantities were the 1646, century and a half before the Constitution, Danish flintlocks that could fire 30 shots without reloading. Repeaters were made in Massachusetts in the early 1700s. So repeaters were well known but very expensive. This didn't change until the needed machine tools were developed decades later. Since most people used rifles as a tool for hunting, single-shot rifles were a better deal for them. With the Revolution, those same rifles were used in the war. But the claim that only single-shot muzzleloaders were envisioned in the Constitution is pure Barbra Streisand. When we look at Supreme Court rulings, the issue is crystal clear. In its 2008 Heller decision, the court states, and I quote, "Some have made the argument, bordering on the frivolous, that only those arms in existence in the 18th century are protected by the Second Amendment. We do not interpret constitutional rights that way. Just as the First Amendment protects modern forms of communication, and the Fourth Amendment applies to modern forms of search, the Second Amendment extends to all instruments that constitute bearable arms, even those that were not in existence at the time of the founding." Close quote. It's hard to be more clear. The Supreme Court explicitly rejects the muzzleloader-only idea. Make the lefty understand that the Supreme Court explicitly rejected his idea long before he ever heard of it. Never back down. When he learns that the people who taught him were lying, then you may have started to chip away at his palace of errors. The next argument is one we've hit before. AR-15s aren't protected. This is just as much Barbra Streisand as the first argument. Let's break it down. Supposedly, the protected arms aren't military arms. But the muskets that the left claims are protected were military arms all through the Revolution. And as we just read from the court in Heller, we don't restrict ourselves to the antique arms of that day. Rather, protected arms are, and I again quote, "The sorts of weapons protected are those in common use at the time." Now, by the way, this idea isn't new. The Supreme Court was quoting from its Miller decision of 1939. We've noted before that there are about 15 million AR-15s in private hands. They are, if not the most popular, at least one of the most popular weapons out there. That's definitely in common use. And by the way, remind your lefty friend that AR doesn't stand for assault rifle. It's short for Armalite rifle. It was produced by the Armalite Company. Finally, hit your lefty square in the face with more from the Supreme Court in Heller. Quote, "At the time of the founding, as now, to bear meant to carry. When used with arms, however, the term has a meaning that refers to carrying for a particular purpose, confrontation. The very enumeration of the right takes out of the hand of government, even the third branch of government, the power to decide on a case-by-case basis whether the right is really worth insisting upon. A constitutional guarantee subject to future judges' assessment of its usefulness is no constitutional guarantee at all. Constitutional rights are enshrined with the scope they were understood to have had when the people adopted them, whether or not future legislatures or, yes, even future judges think that scope is too broad. End quote. Let that sink in. Constitutional guarantees are not subject to the court restricting them. They are defined by what the words meant when they were enacted. Any restrictions that we see are clearly improper. A final bit. Must you wait until you're 21 to buy a gun? Let's recall the Revolutionary War. Oh yeah, that's where the Second Amendment came from. It was possible to enlist and use that military weapon you already owned at age 15. But some went further. Andrew Jackson was part of Washington's army at age 9. That's not a typo. He was 9 when he was captured and tortured by the English. He grew up to become the general who won the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812 and later became our 7th president. Make sure that the lefty understands that it's just as rational to allow any 18-year-old to buy a gun as it is to let him vote. Let's make this really simple. There is nothing rational, either legal or moral, about the lefty proposition. On moral grounds, it deprives the individual of his greatest right, the right to self-defense. It also deprives innocent bystanders of the opportunity to have willing defenders in the event of an emergency. On legal grounds, the answer is crystal clear. The Second Amendment, the highest law in the land, guarantees the right to have and to carry firearms for self-defense. Semi-automatic guns in common use are protected by the Second Amendment. There is a way to change all this. It's called a constitutional amendment. We've got 27 of them, and there's no reason there can't be more. But getting a new amendment is hard, very hard. You have to get 2/3 of both the House and the Senate to agree, and then 3/4 of the states have to agree. Good luck with that. The only other way is to get an Article 5 convention of the states together, but that has never happened. So the left is trying to scream loudly enough to run around the highest law of our land. We have to keep the facts right in front of the lefty's face. We must save the savable. Please like VidZ on Facebook, follow @VidZ on Twitter, and support us on Patreon. Until next time, I'm Dr. Ted Noel.